Karen Dorsey raised her voice at a little boy for playing ball near her flowerbed, unaware that his grandfather was sitting quietly on the porch. The porch swing creaked with the weight of stillness as Henry Collins leaned back, mug in hand, the steam curling upward into the morning breeze. Below him, Lucas darted across the grass in his faded blue, lucky socks, giggling as his soccer ball danced just out of reach. The sky was crisp and pale, a reminder that fall had stepped fully into Woodstream Ridge. Across the street, Mrs. Flannery's hose made a startled whip crack as she fumbled at mid-watering, her head snapping toward the sudden noise like a flag caught in the wind. Karen Dorsey's voice, shrill and deliberate, echoed down the block like the snap of a ruler. "This is not a playground," she barked, pointing stiffly at the space where her precisely spaced asters met the edge of the Collins front lawn. Lucas froze mid-kick, the ball bumping gently against the curb. His small hands clenched at his sides as his cheeks reddened. From his spot on the porch, Henry took a slow sip of coffee. The mug had a chip on the rim and bore the logo of a police softball league from 1981. He didn't move, didn't speak. The trout-shaped key hook next to the screen door caught a sliver of sunlight and glinted faintly. Behind the screen, Emma Collins pushed the curtain back with 2 fingers, her brow tightening. Karen, seemingly satisfied with the silence her declaration had produced, spun on one heel and stalked away. Mrs. Flannery turned off her hose with trembling hands, her gardening gloves soaked. Later that afternoon, Lucas sat curled beside Henry on the porch steps, his sneakers off, toes wiggling in the autumn air. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked, voice low. "No," Henry said, gently nudging a ball bearing with his boot. "You played." Emma appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "She can't talk to him like that." Her voice was tight with restraint. "I don't care what title she's got." She vanished back inside before Henry could answer. Instead, he glanced down the street, where porch flags rippled and Hank's Cafe sign clunked gently in the wind. The daily special, written in looping chalk script, read, "Apple crumb pie, $2 a slice, if cited this week, it's free." The sun dropped low by early evening. Porch lights flicked on one by one like slow, deliberate fireflies. Henry stood at the mailbox, his slippers scuffing softly on the stone path. There, affixed with lavender tape and folded with unnatural precision, was a sealed envelope. He plucked it off with 2 fingers, sniffed once, lavender and printer ink, then flipped it over. Child Activity Disruption Notice, Violation of HOA Tranquility Clause 2.3, it read. Typed. Signed. Laminated. Henry exhaled through his nose. He turned, walked back to the porch, and handed the notice to Emma. She read it twice, eyes narrowing. She laminated it. Henry didn't reply. He stepped inside and returned moments later with a pen and a small notepad. He carefully wrote the time and date on the back corner of the envelope, underlined it once, and walked to the bookshelf by the door. A narrow accordion file sat labeled HOA Notes, Fall. He slipped the envelope inside, smoothing it flat. "Let's document it," he said quietly. Emma's mouth opened, then closed again. Lucas, already in pajamas, had his elbows propped on the window ledge. He watched the dusk swallow the sky with slow dignity. A motion across the street caught Henry's eye. Karen, clad in beige slacks and a lilac windbreaker, marched briskly down the sidewalk. Her clipboard, clutched tight to her chest, bounced slightly with each step. She paused briefly at the Wilson twins' front gate, tilted her head, and began scribbling with intensity. Henry closed the screen door and returned to his chair. The porch swing creaked once, then settled. A new flyer appears on the bulletin board, Porch Harmony Guidelines, Mandatory Review. Signed in violet cursive. The flyer was laminated, of course. Every corner rounded, ink glossy enough to catch the afternoon light. It fluttered slightly on the corkboard between last week's pumpkin bread recipe exchange and a faded notice about missing reading glasses. The smell of glue and lavender clung faintly to the paper. Karen Dorsey had pinned it right at eye level with 3 matching pushpins, lilac-tinted, shaped like lotus blossoms. Emma Collins passed by it on her walk home from Hank's Cafe, her tote heavy with fresh baguettes and a wrapped jar of apple butter. She paused briefly, scanning the title. Porch Harmony Guidelines, Mandatory Review. She narrowed her eyes at the phrasing, her lips pressing into a line. The word mandatory felt less neighborly every time it appeared. Across the street, Karen marched up the Flannery's walkway like a slow-moving gavel. She wore a linen blazer over yoga pants and carried her clipboard like a sacred tablet. Emma slowed just enough to watch the exchange. Karen gestured toward the wind chimes dangling from the Flannery's eaves, speaking in measured, musical tones that didn't reach far. Mrs. Flannery, bent over a row of potted zinnias, looked up with a furrowed brow. Moments later, a thin laminated citation fluttered to the porch rail. Emma continued home, steps quickening. She found Henry on the porch with his file open, a pen resting neatly between his fingers. They cited her wind chimes, Emma said, handing him the flyer. He read it once, then set it aside. Too aggressive, probably, he muttered. Inside, Lucas was at the dining table, head down, tongue out in concentration. A rainbow of chalk dust clung to his fingertips. "Can I redraw the dragon?" he asked without looking up. Emma gave a tired smile. "Maybe tomorrow." That evening, she sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, a notepad on her knee. She'd gone back through 3 months of HOA newsletters. The more she read, the more irregularities surfaced, votes logged before meetings, citations issued with no apparent basis, one amendment that referenced a non-existent clause. Her fingers tapped the mousepad steadily, highlighting dates, jotting page numbers. Outside, porch lights flicked on one by one. The neighborhood dimmed into evening routine, except for the occasional glint of lavender lamination taped to a mailbox or porch post. At the cafe the next morning, Hank had changed the chalkboard sign. Under the regular menu read a new line in pale green chalk, "Free cider for every unfair citation." Emma blinked at it, then smiled. He caught her glance and gave a small shrug. Got a batch that turned too sweet anyway. Karen arrived not long after, leading her assistant Ted, a lanky, red-eared young man in his mid-30s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He carried a shoulder bag that bulged with papers, eyes darting to every porch like they were watching him back. Ted followed Karen up to the Collins porch while she dictated notes into a small recorder. When they reached the steps, Karen paused to adjust a potted fern that had tilted slightly, as if correcting a spiritual imbalance. Ted cleared his throat, looked at Emma, then looked away. "I just need to confirm porch symmetry," he mumbled, barely audible. Emma tilted her head. "Is that in the guidelines?" Ted didn't answer. Karen had already moved on to the next yard. He lingered for half a second, then turned and jogged after her, papers flapping. Henry joined Emma on the steps, holding a cup of black coffee. "Poor kid's gonna sprain something from looking sideways so hard." She didn't laugh. "I think they're printing rules faster than they're meeting." Later that day, Henry stepped out with a small hammer and opened the storage hatch beneath the porch, the one where old storm shutters and busted birdhouses lived. As he moved aside a rusted watering can, he spotted something wedged against the back beam. A long, yellowing envelope, half covered in dust and cobwebs. He pulled it out, brushed it off, and opened it slowly. Inside, a copy of the original HOA charter, signed in blue ink by the founding members over a decade ago. The language was plain, firm, and surprisingly neighborly, nothing about symmetry, nothing about emotional landscaping. He flipped through it until he reached the pages on amendments. No mention of porch reviews or tranquility zones. He whistled low and brought it inside. Emma was just cleaning up Lucas's chalk set when he laid the papers on the table. She looked up, eyes narrowing. "What's this?" "An earlier version," Henry said. "Before the perfume and poetry." Lucas looked up from his drawings. "Why'd they wash away my dragon?" Emma looked down at him and smoothed his hair back. "Because some people don't like bright colors." Henry leaned against the counter. "We'll see about that." A neighbor posts a picture of Karen's new sign, "No outdoor sounds 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., let stillness bloom." The image made its rounds faster than the leaves fell that week. It appeared first on the corkboard inside Hank's cafe, thumbtacked above the specials list. Then it slid into group texts, printed flyers, and someone even chalked a parody version on the sidewalk: "No opinions 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., let Karen bloom." The sign itself had been placed in the center of the neighborhood greenway, mounted with meticulous symmetry on a custom stake-painted lavender. Karen had unveiled it with her usual serene smile and a brief explanation about auditory harmony. A few people clapped, more out of politeness than enthusiasm. Someone coughed and muttered, "What's next? A nap zone." By early October, Woodstream Ridge had transformed. Trees blushed amber, scarecrows leaned at proud angles on porches, and 6 new solar-powered meditation lights now lined the sidewalks near Karen's home. They chirped a soft namaste when motion sensors were triggered, startling more than one dog walker. The block, once filled with kids on scooters and wind chimes tinkling, now held a hush that felt less peaceful than patrolled. Emma sat across from Ted at Hank's cafe, the late morning light slanting through the wide windows. Her laptop was open, a spreadsheet titled "Lavender Incidents" visible on the screen. Ted stirred his tea in slow circles, eyes flicking to the door every few seconds. "I didn't think she'd take it this far," he said quietly. Emma didn't look up. "You notarized these?" "I didn't know she hadn't cleared them with the board," he replied. "She said it was just a formality. She always says it like that." Emma clicked twice and highlighted 3 lines. "These were enacted 5 days before the board even met. That's not a formality. That's forgery." Ted said nothing. Hank walked past their table and slid a fresh apple fritter onto a plate between them. "On the house," he said, then added in a whisper, "Karen cited the Thompsons this morning. Said their porch flannel clashed with the mulch. Visually jarring, she called it." Emma arched a brow. Ted exhaled slowly. Hank pointed toward the chalkboard where a new item had been added in looping white script: "Visual dissonance pi, $1. Back at the Collins home, Henry stood in the garage, printer humming beside him. He flipped through fresh pages of HOA bylaws, cross-referencing the printed amendments with his older, pre-Karen copies. 2 of the signatures didn't match. One looked like it had been digitally added. The other had a notary stamp dated 6 months after the document was supposedly signed. He whistled, low and unimpressed. By afternoon, Emma returned with Ted and Mrs. Flannery in tow. The kitchen table became a makeshift command center. Mrs. Flannery brought a manila folder labeled 2020, Garden Club/HOA Crossover Minutes, filled with scribbled notes and a few sticky tabs shaped like vegetables. "I never throw away anything with glue," she said proudly. Ted hunched forward. "If anyone asks, I wasn't here." Lucas, crouched by the front step, was quietly drawing a rainbow across the concrete with sidewalk chalk. He added clouds and stars with careful strokes. He was nearly done when the chirp of a namaste light signaled Karen's arrival. She approached like a high priestess of order, clipboard clutched tight, scarf fluttering. She stopped at the curb, frowned slightly, and without a word knelt to scrub the drawing away with a damp lavender cloth. Lucas didn't move. He stood silently, arms wrapped around himself, watching her erase his colors. From the porch, Emma opened her mouth, but Henry touched her arm. "Let it settle. Just for a moment." Karen rose, adjusted a solar light, then pivoted toward the Collins porch. "I'll be beginning the Porch Harmony Review tour tomorrow morning," she announced, loud enough for 2 other houses to hear. "Starting here." Emma met her gaze. "We'll be ready." Karen nodded once, then turned and left, the sound of her flats tapping down the sidewalk like metronome ticks. That evening, Emma and Ted sat on the back porch sorting documents while Henry made coffee. The swing creaked as Mrs. Flannery knit a scarf the color of ripe plums. "I notarized something in advance," Ted said suddenly. "For Karen." She insisted it was part of a pilot program. Said it'd get cleaned up in the next vote. But it never did. I think it might have been illegal." Emma didn't answer at first. Then she looked up and said, "Write down everything you remember. We'll need it." The sun had long since dipped when Henry checked the mailbox. Amid the usual coupons and gardening catalog sat a single envelope. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with 5 words, typed in all caps. "They're watching now. Be careful." No signature. No scent. Just warning, sharp and plain. A torn envelope left in Emma's mailbox reads, "You didn't get this from me." Inside, a photocopied HOA meeting note dated 3 weeks before any vote. The paper was folded twice, torn across the bottom edge, and smelled faintly of spearmint gum and toner ink. Emma read the line again, her eyes narrowing. The note inside was a scanned agenda titled, "WVR Board Authorization, Landscaping Rebalancing." The header bore the HOA logo, lavender ink, of course, and listed Karen Dorsey's signature alongside a second one Emma didn't recognize. The date? September 3rd. But the vote approving this agenda wasn't recorded until the 27th. She slipped the envelope under a cookbook on the kitchen counter and pulled her laptop closer. It was still open to her lavender incidents spreadsheet. Outside, porch mums leaned into the wind, their orange and red blooms nodding with seasonal gravity. Across the street, a man in a neon vest cleared gutters while a teenager raked leaves into careful piles. It was the start of Woodstream Ridge's annual leaf cleanup, except this year, the volunteers had been replaced. Karen called them the Visual Clarity Task Force. Emma stepped onto the porch with a mug in hand just as Mrs. Flannery approached, balancing a tray covered with a checkered cloth. Brought pumpkin scones. The good kind. Real spice, no essential oil nonsense. Emma smiled, but her eyes were scanning the street. "Did you hear about the new decals?" "Porch positivity meters," Mrs. Flannery said with a sigh. "I already got one. Right on the mailbox. It chirped at my mailman." Inside, Henry was hunched over a binder of bylaws, flipping pages like a man hunting a pattern. He clicked the pen between his fingers once, twice, then circled a date on a reprint. "Look here," he called out. "That's the 3rd one with this notary stamp." He held it up. The seal was faint and cracked, expired for over 2 years. Ted appeared 20 minutes later, knocking softly. He stepped inside with an old manila envelope tucked under his arm and a travel mug in his hand. "She's paying her cousin," he said without preamble. "Some company in Phoenix. Decor Consulting. It's in the invoices, paid as Emotional Symmetry Design." Henry raised his brow. "Creative." Ted dropped the envelope on the table. Inside were 2 printed receipts, one dated 3 weeks before the supposed meeting, the other labeled Vision Path Calibration. Both signed with Karen's familiar violet flourish. Emma pulled her laptop closer and entered a new line into her database: backdated meeting materials, decorative vendor, family tie, no public vote. Later that afternoon, they gathered around the kitchen island, scones cut into halves and scattered like paperweights across the documents. Mrs. Flannery read aloud from a crinkled folder, "I authorize preliminary funding for porch alignment consulting," she snorted. "Preliminary. Like she's building a rocket." "Do we have enough?" Emma asked. "We've got smoke," Ted said. "If we show it right, maybe someone will see the fire." They decided to present everything during Fall Fest. Emma would build the slides, Ted would gather the rest of the emails. Henry volunteered to scan the oldest charters for contrast. Mrs. Flannery offered to knit a truth cozy for the flash drive. At Hank's Cafe that evening, someone had replaced Karen's latest bulletin board post with a taped-up photo of a squirrel clutching a lavender sign. Beneath it, a scribble in Sharpie, "Emotional acorn alignment now available." Hank didn't remove it. He glanced at Emma and deadpanned, "The squirrels know." Just before dusk, as Emma watered the mums on the porch, a soft knock came at the door. She wiped her hands on her jeans and opened it to find Ted, pale in the twilight, holding a small USB drive in his open palm. "She made me delete everything," he whispered. "This is what I saved." HOA members wake up to a thick packet labeled HOA Harmony Directive, Volume 1. Ted calls it, the Lavender Bible. The packet was unmissable, 37 laminated pages bound with twine and scented faintly of lilac. It sat on doorsteps across Woodstream Ridge, nestled between pumpkin bundles and doormats, waiting like a pastel warning. The title, printed in flowing script, was framed by watercolor sketches of symmetrical fences and hedges shaped like hearts. Emma flipped through hers with raised brows, seated cross-legged on the living room floor. Each page was worse than the last. One diagram showed optimal porch cushion placement for emotional airflow. Another assigned numerical ratings to lawn color harmony. A final fold-out featured a circular zoning map labeled Vibration Corridors. At the bottom, in shimmering ink, curated by Karen Dorsey, WVR-HOA visionary. Ted, on speakerphone from Hank's Cafe, let out a low whistle. She named it Volume 1. I think she's planning sequels. Outside, fall had dressed the street in rebellion. Neighbors began staging accidental resistance, orange and red wreaths clashing beautifully with Karen's palette. One porch featured a scarecrow with mirrored sunglasses and a sign, "Harmonize this." Hank hung a banner under his cafe window that read, "Pumpkin pie, not purple mandates." Henry stood at the kitchen island, scanning receipts into a folder labeled Lavender Incidents, Compiled Evidence. Emma sat beside him, jotting notes and adding flagged files from her laptop. "Look at this one," she said, holding up an invoice for meditation path calibration, paid to ES Strategies LLC. Ted had confirmed earlier that the LLC belonged to Karen's cousin, Charles. "She's paying family," Henry said, quiet and flat. "Through HOA funds." Ted arrived just after lunch, carrying a battered file box and a gift-wrapped envelope. "I'm done," he announced. "Resigned this morning. Left a note on the bulletin board, free to porch again." He placed the envelope on the table. Inside, screenshots of email threads, payment authorizations, and a flagged message titled Urgent Pre-Date Approvals. "We have enough for Fall Fest," Emma said. "But we need to make it stick." "Make it simple," Henry added. "Truth doesn't need packaging." Later that afternoon, sticky notes began appearing on HOA signs throughout the neighborhood. Some were funny, "Where's the vote?" Others blunt, "Not my board." Mrs. Flannery crocheted a new doormat that read, "Namaste away," in bold yarn lettering. She delivered it to the cafe personally, then asked Hank for one of the rebellion scones. As the sun dipped, Henry and Lucas stood in the backyard by the old fire pit. The metal ring was rusted, and the stone base uneven, but it still worked. Henry struck a match and lit a small pile of kindling. "Isn't this too old?" Lucas asked, watching the flames start to curl. "Not everything old is useless, son," Henry replied, steady and low. "Some things just need the right fire." Emma watched them from the back porch, mug in hand, eyes soft. That evening, inboxes across Woodstream Ridge pinged with a new email from Karen. Subject line, "Manifesting Order, Aesthetic Governance for the Soul." The body text was longer than usual, quoting philosophy, landscape theory, and a self-authored mantra about vibrational equity. At the bottom, in all caps. Keynote announcement, Fall Fest main tent. Saturday at noon. Mandatory attendance encouraged. There was no signature. Just a pale purple lotus, centered. Emma hands Mara Jennings a folder titled, Lavender Incidents, Compiled. Unedited. Mara says, "Well, this is a first." The folder was thick, its corners slightly curled from too many reviews. Inside were receipts printed in fading ink, screenshots with timestamps, notary seals that didn't match, and an itemized list of every lavender citation issued since the equinox. Mara held it between two fingers like it might sprout incense and start humming. She looked up at Emma, eyebrows raised. "Well, this is a first." They stood just outside the township office, where the wind whipped sharp through the metal railing and carried the faint scent of cider and early frost. Mara tucked the folder under her arm. "I'll review it tonight." Quietly. Back in Woodstream Ridge, preparations for Fall Fest had overtaken the lawns. Porches bloomed with flannel buntings, casseroles were being prepped by the dozen, and the town green sprouted tent poles and strings of twinkling lights like mushrooms after rain. In the center of it all, Karen Dorsey was constructing a dome-shaped booth wrapped in lavender silk, shaped unmistakably like a lotus flower. A sign in front read, "Chakra Realignment Check-in." She paced the inside with a lavender remote in one hand and a notepad in the other, pressing buttons to cue flute music that drifted unervingly between tones. A portable diffuser pumped out a fog of rosemary and affirmation oils. Her voice, faint through the silk panels, repeated lines like, "Aesthetics are soul governance and silence is alignment made visible." Inside the Collins home, Henry sat at the table, comparing line items in two thick printouts. On one, Visual Enhancement Workshop was listed as a $482 charge. On the other, the same item was reclassified as Community Safety Decor. He circled both. Emma paced nearby, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, that's the full audit. Yes, we're confirming Ted's signature was forged on page 3. We'll present this Saturday. Thank you." She hung up and rubbed her eyes. Ted arrived carrying a reusable grocery bag filled with files. His sweatshirt read, "Porch Life Forever" in a hand-stitched font. "That's the last of it," he said. "Emails, notes, even the lavender print order receipts. It's all there." Emma nodded. Did she know? Ted hesitated. She thought deleting them from the cloud would do the trick. "But I exported backups." She never asked if I was loyal, just efficient. Outside, Lucas was in the yard again, gently kicking his soccer ball toward the edge of the street. He paused, looked up, and spotted Karen walking past, lips moving in silent rehearsal. Her scarf trailed behind her like a sermon. He waited until she passed, then kicked the ball harder, straight across the empty sidewalk. That evening, the fire pit flickered to life in the Collins backyard. Logs crackled. Mugs of warm cider passed from hand to hand. Neighbors sat on folding chairs, wrapped in blankets, sharing updates in the glow. Mrs. Flannery brought sweet potato muffins. The Wilson twins offered up leftover popcorn strings from their Halloween display. Ted poured cider with both hands, a smile tucked behind his scarf. "We never had fire pit gatherings before," he said. Karen said it encouraged congregational chaos. "Seems we like a little chaos," Henry replied, sipping his mug. Lucas stepped forward, holding a crumpled HOA memo in both hands. The words, "Porch Pathway Review," were barely visible through the wrinkles. He tossed it into the flames. It caught quickly, curling inward and disappearing into the dark. Henry watched it vanish and said, almost to himself, "That one's earned its ashes." The sky above was clean and clear. Somewhere in the distance, a string of lights blinked to life over the Fall Fest tents. In the living room, Emma clicked through her slides one final time. The files were in order. Evidence organized. Projector bulbs checked. Across the street, Karen's dome pulsed with lavender glow. Her slideshow would begin tomorrow. So would Emma's. Karen smiles from the podium, lavender sash over her shoulder, as her slideshow begins. She doesn't know Emma switched the input. The Fall Fest tent shimmered beneath layers of chiffon draping and battery-powered fairy lights. A soft haze of cinnamon and cider drifted in from the church bake sale tables, where pies cooled beside knitted cozies and tiny chalkboard signs. Folding chairs filled quickly, occupied by neighbors wrapped in quilted jackets and curiosity. Near the back, a toddler munched on a caramel apple, sticky cheeks shining. At the front, Karen Dorsey stood beneath a printed banner reading "Manifesting Order, Aesthetic Governance for the Soul." She adjusted her sash, lavender with gold trim, and tapped the microphone once. A gentle flute melody began to play from the speakers, and the screen behind her flickered to life, displaying a pastel lotus in slow bloom. "Welcome," Karen said, voice serene. "We are gathered here today not just as homeowners, but as stewards of symmetry." From the third row, Emma Collins sat beside Henry, laptop resting on her knees, its small indicator light blinking slowly. The projector, patched into a discreet switch box taped beneath the podium, waited quietly. Karen clicked to the next slide, porch silhouettes labeled with vibrational scores. Our homes are energy, she intoned. We must curate their tone, or risk communal dissonance. Behind the cider barrel, Mara Jennings crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Ted stood at the back, scarf tucked under his chin, hands deep in his jacket pockets. When Karen clicked again, a slide of lawn decor arranged in Fibonacci spirals appeared. Emma rose. Before we realign, she said calmly, may we review how we arrived here? Karen blinked, hands still on the clicker. Emma stepped to the front, unplugged a cord, then reconnected it. The screen flashed once, then changed. Gone were the Lotus slides. In their place, a scanned receipt dated September 3rd, marked Approved, Visual Clarity Enhancements. A second page followed, zoning violations for the koi pond, flagged emails between Karen and a vendor named Charles Whitmore, and side-by-side budget discrepancies. Karen's smile faltered. This data, Emma said evenly, was compiled over 3 weeks. Each entry cross-referenced with HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and local zoning codes. Another slide appeared, Karen's handwritten notes, push before vote, Charles will backdate if needed. The tent fell silent except for the faint whir of the projector fan. Ted stepped forward and held up his phone. There's also this. He pressed play. Karen's voice, unmistakable, get it done. I'll fix the paperwork later. Gasps scattered through the audience. Someone coughed, sharp and intentional. A crochet bag slipped off a lap. Karen's hands trembled as she reached for the projector cord. You don't understand visual leadership, she barked, tugging at the cables. Her heel caught on the edge of her scarf. In one swift, unscripted motion, she stumbled sideways into the corner of her altar display, knocking over a crystal bowl and collapsing the silk-covered table. A cascade of amethyst pebbles clattered across the plywood floor like marbles let loose. From somewhere in the middle rows, a phone shutter clicked. Karen sat amid the fabric, breathing heavy, mascara slightly smudged. For the first time, she didn't speak. Mara stepped forward, pulling a folded letter from her coat. All HOA activity is hereby suspended, she said clearly, pending audit review. Effective immediately. A ripple ran through the tent. Emma returned to her seat. Henry reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. Ted exhaled, slow and full. Outside, Lucas stood by the porch post with a cup of cider, watching the tent flap in the wind. A neighbor passed him a caramel square. He didn't speak, but smiled. Behind him, the banner at Karen's booth drooped to one side, its adhesive loosening in the breeze. Lucas kicks a ball across the lawn. No one stops him. It bounced once against the curb, then rolled gently across the sidewalk, its blue and green panels catching late October sunlight. Leaves swirled as he chased it, the air filled with the smell of roasted squash and cinnamon. The porch flags on every house fluttered lazily in the breeze, no longer required to coordinate or conform. No one leaned out to scold. No clipboard hovered nearby. Just the sound of kids laughing, the clink of casserole tins, and the hush of wood against wood as folding chairs scraped across driveways. Emma sealed a cardboard box with quiet finality and labeled it in clear black ink, archived, HOA Fall 2023. She stood in the hallway a moment, fingers resting lightly on the lid. Then she placed the box on the shelf above the pantry and took a deep breath, one that tasted like relief and dry leaves. Outside, Henry sat in his usual chair on the porch, thermos in hand, watching the street without tension. Lucas darted past, flanked by the Wilson twins, each of them dressed in layers of flannel and mismatched socks. One of the twins wore a shirt that read, "Porch Life Forever," scrawled in fabric paint across the front. Ted passed by a few minutes later, carrying a small ladder and a handful of laminated tags shaped like birds. He nodded toward Henry. "Installing our new porch markers today." "What do they say?" Henry asked, sipping. Ted grinned. "Community watch, for fairness, not fences." Emma emerged from the house with a small envelope in hand, addressed in looping handwriting and scented unmistakably with lavender. She handed it to Henry without a word. He opened it slowly, the paper soft and floral. The letter was unsigned. It spoke of regret, miscommunication, alignment misunderstood. Phrases like vision misperceived and inner governance in flux floated through the paragraphs like apologies afraid to touch the ground. Henry folded the letter in half, then in half again. He rose and walked to the backyard where the fire pit lay cool and waiting. The kindling caught easily. He held the letter over the flame for a moment, then let it go. It curled into itself like a sleeping leaf and vanished in a puff of lavender smoke. Emma joined him silently, arms crossed, watching the ashes drift. On the town green, the old lotus booth had been replaced by a bright little stand of mismatched bookshelves and crates filled with pies. A hand-painted sign read, "Take a book, leave a pie." Next to it, someone had chalked a wide rainbow onto the sidewalk. The colors curved easily, no longer scrubbed or muted. Mrs. Flannery arrived carrying a tote bag bursting with yarn. She began passing out hand-drawn patterns for something she called the anti-citation cozy. Neighbors gathered at picnic tables, swapping stories over steaming mugs. Someone played guitar. A dog in a pumpkin costume slept beneath a folding chair. Dinner arrived slowly, one dish at a time. Lasagna labeled, "No more mandates," 3 kinds of chili, a lopsided apple tart, and cornbread warm from the oven. The meal moved between porches and laps, passed from neighbor to neighbor without permission slips or laminated rules. Later, as the sun dipped low, Lucas stood by the creek's edge. The water flowed calm and clear. A single pink plastic flamingo bobbed gently on the surface, snagged on a branch like a quiet joke only the neighborhood could understand. He looked back toward the porches, where Henry leaned against the railing and Emma poured cider into mugs. Music drifted on the wind, and laughter followed, soft and strong. Woodstream Ridge had found its rhythm again, not curated or color-coded, just lived. And the leaves kept falling, unnoticed and free. As the last leaves drifted across quiet porches and the sound of laughter returned to Woodstream Ridge, something deeper had settled too, a sense of balance not enforced, but earned. No more laminated notices, no whispered warnings, just neighbors rediscovering what it meant to belong. When rules become weapons, they fracture more than fences, but truth, kindness, and quiet courage can patch what fear once tore. Like a porch light left on through a long night, even a single act of gentle defiance can guide a neighborhood home. Maybe it's not about fighting louder, but standing firmer, together. And maybe that's where real harmony begins.